Welcome to Bible Answers Now. Have you ever come across the term concubine while reading the Bible and wondered, what does this really mean? It's a term that doesn't come up often in our modern lives, but in biblical times it held significant cultural and spiritual meaning. Today, we'll explore what a concubine was, why they were part of the biblical narrative, and how understanding this can deepen our connection with God's Word. The concept of a concubine can feel foreign, even uncomfortable, especially when we consider the roles of women and relationships in today's world. But in ancient Israel, a concubine was often a woman who had a recognized, though lesser status than a wife. Let's start with a story that brings this all to light. In the book of Genesis, we meet a man named Abraham, the father of faith. Abraham's wife Sarah was unable to have children for many years. In Genesis 16, Sarah gives her servant Hagar to Abraham as a concubine, hoping that through Hagar she might have a child. The Bible tells us, so after Abraham had lived in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, Abraham's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abraham as a wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. Genesis 16, 3-4. In this passage, Hagar is treated as a concubine because she was not married to Abraham in the full covenantal sense that Sarah was, but she still bore him a child, a significant act in that culture. What does this tell us? First, a concubine wasn't merely a woman of lower social rank. She had specific duties, and children born to her could inherit from the father. This reflects the importance of legacy and the passing down of blessings, especially in the context of God's covenant promises to Abraham. But there's more to consider. Abraham and Sarah's actions reveal the tension between human attempts to control God's promises and God's timing. Sarah's decision to use Hagar as a concubine shows a lack of trust in God's plan, and the strife that followed, especially between Sarah and Hagar, reminds us that impatience often leads to consequences we weren't expecting. Later, in 1 Samuel 1, we read about Elkanah and his two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. We see the distress this caused, and Hannah's desperate prayers for a son. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly, and she made a vow, saying, "Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head." 1 Samuel 1, 10-11. While Peninnah isn't referred to as a concubine here, this situation still helps us understand the cultural importance of children in a household with multiple wives. Children were blessings, but they also defined a woman's status. In Hannah's case, her fervent prayer and eventual blessing with a son, Samuel, was a testimony to God's faithfulness and timing. A key insight we gain from these examples is the role of women in biblical times, particularly in patriarchal structures. A concubine, while legally considered a secondary wife, often bore a significant emotional and spiritual role within the household. Their children could be heirs, and while their status wasn't equal to a primary wife, they were still part of the family. This can be difficult for us to understand in modern terms, but in the context of biblical times, it shows the different ways relationships were shaped by the culture and divine purposes. In Judges 19, we encounter a tragic and horrific story that involves a concubine. A Levite's concubine is brutally mistreated and ultimately dies. The Bible words, her master rose up in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to continue his journey, behold, the woman, his concubine, lay at the door of the house on the threshold. Judges 19:27. This grim narrative serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of women, particularly concubines, who held a precarious position in society. It reflects the sinfulness of the time, people living without regard for God's laws, often exploiting the weaker members of society. This story is disturbing but crucial for understanding how the Bible portrays human brokenness and the need for redemption. While we see concubines in many different contexts throughout the Bible, it's essential to remember that the Bible doesn't prescribe this practice. It simply reports it. The ideal relationship, as set forth in Genesis 2:24, was one man and one woman in the covenant of marriage. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. God's plan from the beginning was for a man and a woman to be united as one in marriage, not a system where women were placed in subservient roles like concubines. Understanding concubinage in biblical times helps us gain clarity about God's design for relationships today. While the Bible includes historical accounts that involve concubines, it also points us to a higher ideal of love, respect, and covenantal faithfulness between a husband and wife. For us today, reflecting on these stories can challenge us to think about how we treat others, particularly those who might be marginalized or vulnerable in society. How can we be a source of respect, protection, and love in the relationships we have? As we conclude, let's take a moment to reflect. Are there areas of your life where impatience or lack of trust in God has caused harm to others? Are there relationships in your life where you can extend greater love, kindness, and understanding? Take a moment to pray, asking God to guide you toward a heart of patience and to help you live out His love in every relationship. And don't forget to journal your thoughts as you reflect on how you can honor God's Word in your daily interactions. Thanks for joining us today on Bible Answers Now. If you found this insight helpful, leave a comment below and let us know your thoughts. And remember, hit that like button and subscribe for more insightful Bible answers. May God bless you and your loved ones today and always. What's your favorite verse for navigating relationships? Share it in the comments. We'd love to hear your reflections.